December is arriving, and you are already making the decision. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in the small ways you are already planning to coast, to finish the year softly, to reset in January, to give yourself permission to wait. You are already choosing. That choice is going to cost you more than you know. Here is what nobody tells you about the last 30 days of a year. They are not a waiting room. They are not downtime between the version of you that existed in January and the version you keep promising yourself will show up next January. They are a hinge. A decade hinge. And the people who understand that one fact move through this month in a completely different way than everyone around them. Most people treat the final 30 days like a closing ceremony, like the year is essentially over and the real work begins when the calendar resets. That thinking feels reasonable. It feels mature, even, like you are pacing yourself. It is not reasonable. It is the most expensive habit you have. The version of you that walks into the next year is not built on January 1st. It is built right now, in the decisions that feel small enough to postpone, in the hours that feel too close to a holiday to matter, in this month which the world has collectively agreed to waste. What you are about to hear will not give you a motivational push. It will give you something more precise than that. A clear understanding of exactly what is being decided in the next 30 days, why it reaches further than you have been told, and what it actually takes to use this month the way the people who end up financially different actually use it. You will not hear this the same way at the end. Chapter 1. The last 30 days nobody takes seriously. There is a moment that returns at the end of every single year, in every culture, across every generation that has ever measured time. A threshold appears. The old year narrows down to its final stretch, and something in the human spirit stirs, some ancient awareness that a door is closing and another one is about to open. Every civilization that ever kept a calendar felt this. And in that moment, most people throughout history made the same choice. They paused. They exhaled. They decided, quietly and without much ceremony, that the time for serious effort had already passed for this year. That real change belonged to the version of themselves waiting on the other side of January 1st. This pattern is not weakness. It is one of the most consistent human behaviors ever recorded. And it is costing you more than you have ever been told. You are at that threshold right now. What you do in the next 30 days is not a warm-up. It is the thing itself. There is an idea here worth letting land a little longer. More than 90% of people who enter the final month of any year report feeling behind on what they intended to accomplish. Behind on savings. Behind on the version of their career they had pictured. Behind on the feeling that their life is moving in a direction they actually chose. 90%. That is not a fringe group. That is nearly everyone listening to this right now. And the almost universal response to that feeling is to defer. To say, next year I start fresh. To let December become a holding room where intentions go to wait and, more often than not, to quietly disappear. There is a word for this, and it is not laziness. Laziness implies the absence of desire. What you have felt at the end of years past was not the absence of desire. It was the presence of something more insidious. It was incremental thinking. The quiet belief that real change happens in long, slow, steady arcs that begin on clean calendar dates. That nothing you do in a compressed, awkward, holiday-disrupted month could possibly matter enough to bother trying. That safety lives in waiting. That belief is the villain of the next decade of your life. Bring to mind where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Not metaphorically, actually picture it. The place you were living, the number in your bank account, the work you were doing, the version of yourself you were inhabiting every morning when you woke up. Now ask yourself one honest question. How much of what is different today was the result of something you deliberately decided, versus something that simply happened to you while you were waiting to begin? For most people, the honest answer is uncomfortable. Most of what changed happened not because of a bold decision, but because time moved and circumstances shifted, whether you were steering or not. That is the cost of surrendering thresholds. Here is the idea that will run through every chapter of this book, so pay attention to it now. Every decade of a person's financial life has a hinge point, not a starting line, a hinge. A short, dense, high-pressure moment where the identity you inhabit going forward gets set, not slowly over years, but fast, in a narrow window where conditions are unusually ripe for change. Miss the hinge, and the decade swings in a direction you did not choose. Hit it deliberately, and the same decade bends toward the version of you that you have been circling but never quite becoming. The final 30 days of 2026 are a decade hinge. Not because the calendar is magic, not because January 1st carries some mystical charge, but because of what is happening in you right now, psychologically, emotionally, neurologically. You are in a state of elevated self-assessment. Every person who reaches the end of a year finds themselves in a brief, unusual window where identity feels more fluid than it does in March or July. The self-concept loosens. The question of who you are becoming becomes more accessible than usual. That looseness, that psychological openness, is one of the most valuable raw materials that exists for anyone who wants to change how they operate in the world. Most people feel that openness, and then close it back down with celebration, distraction, and the ritual of deferral. You are going to do something different with it. Meet a man named Carl. He was 31 years old, working a project management job for a mid-size logistics company. He was making decent money, but nothing close to what he had imagined when he was 24 and writing salary goals in a notebook he no longer owned. December arrived that year and Carl did what Carl always did. He coasted, bought gifts, attended parties, let the end of the year become a long exhale. He told himself January was for planning, December was for rest. He had earned it. January came. Carl opened a new notebook. He set 3 financial goals, the same 3 goals he had set the previous 2 Januaries, and he meant every word. By February 15th, the inertia of his existing life had absorbed the notebook whole. By March, he was not behind on his goals. He had simply stopped measuring. By December of that next year, Carl sat in the same chair, in the same apartment, and felt the same specific ache. The feeling of a year that had passed through him rather than been built by him. He opened his phone and scrolled for 45 minutes before going to sleep. Carl was not a failure. Carl was a man who kept treating the threshold as a waiting room. The pattern Carl lived is not unique to Carl. It is the dominant pattern. And the reason it is dominant is not that people lack ambition or intelligence. It is that almost no one has ever told them the truth about what the final month of a year actually is. They have been taught to treat it as a conclusion, an exhaust note, a rest before the real race begins. That framing is not just inaccurate. It is the precise mechanism by which one mediocre year becomes two, and two become a decade, and a decade becomes a biography you did not write. This is where the open loop needs a fair warning. You came to this chapter with a question already living in you, whether you named it or not. The question is something close to this. Is it actually possible to change the direction of something as large as a financial decade in 30 days? That question deserves a real answer. The full answer will come, but it requires one thing to be established first. It requires you to understand what actually changes during high-pressure identity windows and why the pressure is not a problem. The pressure is the point. A forge does not make metal stronger by being gentle with it. The forge works precisely because the conditions are extreme and temporary. 30 days of deliberate, focused pressure on the version of yourself you are becoming does something that 30 months of half-hearted intention cannot. It resets the reference point. Not your habits first, your identity first. Because behavior follows identity every time with a reliability that no productivity system has ever been able to replicate. The 30 days ahead of you are not a sprint before a rest. They are a forge. What you put in them will not just affect December. It will set the internal operating conditions for every financial decision, every professional choice, every self-assessment you make in the decade ahead. The identity you inhabit going into 2027 is not waiting for you on January 1st. It is being cast right now, by what you choose to do or not do with the days that everyone else is surrendering. So here is what this chapter needs you to carry forward. The final month of any year is not dead time. It is the highest leverage psychological window available to you before the calendar closes. And leverage, by definition, means that small, deliberate inputs produce disproportionately large outcomes. The person who uses this window correctly does not just start the new year with better habits. They start it as a different version of themselves, one whose decisions, reactions, and daily defaults are already running on different code. In a later section, you are going to meet a claim about consistency and how lasting change actually works that overturns the common assumption. After that really registers, it shifts what you do every single morning. But that comes later. Right now, the only thing that matters is the question you carry into the next chapter. You have treated the end of years as a waiting room before. You know what that produces. The question is not whether something different is possible for you. The question is whether you are willing to stop waiting for January to give you permission to begin. Chapter 2. Why January resolutions always lie to you. January does not save you. Almost everyone you know believes it does. They believe the calendar flip carries power. They believe something real happens when the clock strikes midnight on the 31st of December. They believe a new year delivers new capacity. Most people reading this have built their entire self-improvement strategy around that belief. And that belief is wrong, not partially wrong, not wrong in some philosophical way you can adjust for. Wrong in the specific, mechanical, psychological way that produces the same outcome every single year. Which is why you are here now, in the final days of 2026, still holding the same goals you wrote down 12 months ago. The promise of January is not a promise. It is a postponement. Somewhere beneath the noise of countdown clocks and fresh planners, you already know this. You have known it for a while. What you have not known until now is exactly why, and more importantly, what to do instead before this year closes its door on you entirely. Here is the question that will run underneath everything in this chapter. If January has all this power, why does it keep failing the same people the same way? Hold that question for a moment. We will come back to it with something that might sting a little. Think about the version of January you have experienced most often. Not the version you planned, the version that actually happened. You probably took a few days off between Christmas and the New Year. You slept more than usual. You ate in a way you told yourself was the last hurrah before the reset. You wrote some goals in a notebook or typed them into an app or spoke them out loud in a voice memo you have never replayed. And then January arrived and you started. You genuinely started with real intention and real belief. Maybe you held it for a week, maybe 3 weeks. Maybe you made it to February before the whole structure began to sag and then silently collapse into the same life you had been living before. That is not a willpower failure. Willpower had almost nothing to do with it. Meet Priya. Priya is 29 years old. She works in marketing for a mid-size company in a city she moved to 3 years ago because she thought proximity to opportunity would be enough. She is not lazy. She works long hours. She reads the right books, follows the right accounts, subscribes to the right newsletters. Every November, Priya starts to feel the familiar electricity of a coming reset. She tells herself December is chaotic. She tells herself the holiday schedule makes real change impossible. She tells herself January is when she will finally fix her savings rate, start the side business she has been drafting in her notes app for 14 months, and stop spending the first 45 minutes of every morning scrolling through other people's highlight reels. January 1st arrives. Priya wakes up early. She makes the coffee she usually buys. She opens her journal to a fresh page. She writes 3 goals and 5 affirmations and 1 big vision for the year. She feels genuinely different. She feels like this year is the year the electricity becomes current. By the 16th of January, the journal is closed. By February, the Notes app business plan has 3 new lines added to it and then nothing. By March, Priya is looking at her bank account with the same low-grade dread she felt in October, wondering how she is still in the same place. Priya does not lack vision. Priya lacks the understanding of why her system keeps breaking at the same joint. The break happens because comfort is the wrong soil for identity change. Here is what Priya's January actually gave her: rest, relief from pressure, a sense of emotional spaciousness, and a blank slate. Those feel like ideal conditions for transformation. They are not. They are ideal conditions for planning transformation without experiencing it. The blank slate does not ask anything of you. It makes no demands. It costs you nothing to write on it. And anything that costs nothing to start will cost you everything to maintain when the resistance returns. The resistance always returns. Real change does not grow in blank soil. It grows in friction. It grows when something is ending, when stakes are present, when the version of yourself you have been running is visibly running out of runway. Change that begins at the edge of something, the final days of a year, the last stretch before a deadline, the closing chapter of a period you cannot re-enter. That change grows under pressure that does not evaporate when Monday becomes Tuesday. This is the mechanical reason January fails you. You arrive at January having removed almost every piece of friction from your life. You rested. You indulged. You turned the pressure dial all the way down. And then you ask your identity to change in that low-pressure environment. But identity does not reorganize itself in comfort. Identity reorganizes under stress, under consequence, under the specific feeling that something real is at stake. You spent 2 weeks telling your nervous system there is no urgency. And then on January 1st you ask it to produce urgency from scratch. It cannot, so it fakes it. And fake urgency lasts about 2 weeks. Now close the loop on 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 for just a moment because her story does not end in March. In late November of the following year, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘's company announces a restructuring. Nothing is confirmed yet. Her role may change. The project she has been leading may be reassigned. For the first time in years, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 does not wait for January. She opens her Notes app business plan on a Thursday evening and works on it for 2 hours straight, without once feeling like she was forcing herself. She registers the business name the following Saturday. She sends her first cold email to a potential client on a Tuesday in early December, during what she would previously have called the chaotic holiday season. The pressure changed her behavior in 11 days more than 5 consecutive January resets had changed it in 5 years. That is not a coincidence. That is the mechanism. Now here is the mirror moment, and it requires your honesty. Go back to where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Think about the specific goals you wrote down or said out loud or promised yourself at the start of that year. How many of those goals are still on the list? How many times have you renewed the same resolution in slightly different language, with slightly different tools, carrying the same belief that this January would be the one that stuck? That is not a character flaw. That is a system flaw. And systems can be replaced. Before long, you are going to meet a claim about motivation, specifically about where motivation comes from and when to trust it that overturns the common assumption. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts what you actually do when you wake up on a hard morning. For now, stay here in this diagnosis. The calendar does not flip your identity. You flip your identity. The only question is what conditions you place yourself inside when you choose to do it. Comfort says wait for January. Pressure says begin while the ending is still real and felt and visible. You are inside an ending right now. The year has weeks left, not months. The decade is not abstract from here. It is measurable, close, almost audible in the way that approaching things carry sound before they arrive. What you do in this closing stretch does not just affect this year. It affects the version of you that shows up to start the next year, the next 3 years, the next 10. The person you are when January 1st arrives is determined by what you do before January 1st arrives. That is the truth about January that January will never tell you. Resolutions fail because they are born in comfort and bred in blank space. The friction of an ending is not a problem to wait out. It is the exact pressure required to forge something that will not collapse when February comes, and the blank slate fills itself back in with the demands of ordinary life. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 found that out because circumstance forced the friction on her. You do not have to wait for circumstance. The friction is here, right now, in these final 30 days, if you choose to use it rather than mute it. So here is the question this chapter leaves you with, the one that will not let you sleep too comfortably tonight. Every January of your adult life, you have started fresh and arrived at December in roughly the same position. What makes you certain that one more blank slate will do what every previous blank slate could not? Chapter 3. Pressure doesn't break you, it reveals you. Pressure doesn't create who you are. It finds out. That probably sounds like something you'd read on a motivational poster at a dentist's office. So hear what it actually means before you dismiss it. Most people believe that character is built slowly over years through quiet consistency. There is a version of that which is true, but the version most people are living is not quiet consistency. It is quiet avoidance dressed up to look like patience. Here is the counterintuitive fact. Compression builds identity faster than time does. 30 days under real pressure does more to determine who you become than 3 years of comfortable intention. The reason you haven't heard this stated plainly is that it requires admitting something uncomfortable. You have been negotiating with your own potential instead of forcing it into the open. This chapter is going to show you how that negotiation ends, and what happens the moment you stop giving yourself room to retreat. That question from the last chapter, every January, a new start, and every December, roughly the same position, let that stay open for now. The answer isn't what you think it is. You'll see exactly why before this chapter ends. Remember where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Not in the abstract, specifically. Where were you sleeping? Who were you calling? What did your bank account look like on a Tuesday in the middle of the month when nothing special was happening? Think about what you told yourself you would change. Think about how gently you planned to change it. Now you are here. Something did not work, and the thing that did not work has a name, even if nobody has given it to you yet. The name is incremental negotiation. It is the belief that you can edge your way into a different life the same way you'd ease into a cold swimming pool, a little at a time, until the shock passes, until it feels comfortable, until you're ready. The problem is that the pool is not waiting for you. Time does not ease. It accelerates. Every year you spend inching toward the version of yourself you actually want to be is a year the distance grows harder to close, not easier. Small moves feel safe, but safety, practiced long enough, becomes its own kind of trap. Here is what compression actually does to a person. When a blacksmith forges iron, the iron does not become something new through gentle warming. The heat has to be extreme. The hammer has to fall. Not because the blacksmith is cruel, but because the molecular structure of the material will not reorganize unless it is forced. The bonds that hold the old shape in place are real bonds. They do not loosen on their own. They require something that feels from the inside of the metal like destruction, and produces from the outside something harder and more precise than the original material could ever have become without it. You are not iron, but the principle holds. Your identity, the version of yourself you carry into every room, every financial decision, every conversation about money and work and what you're worth, that identity has a structure too. And that structure was built mostly by accident. It was built by 1,000 small experiences you never chose, repeated until they calcified into belief. The belief that you work a certain kind of job, the belief that people like you earn a certain kind of income, the belief that the responsible thing is always the cautious thing. These are not facts. They are the shape the cold iron settled into before anyone thought to forge it. 30 days of real pressure does not gently warm those structures. It heats them until they are movable, and then it gives you the chance to set the new shape deliberately for the first time instead of by default. Now here is something most people miss entirely about pressure. It does not manufacture qualities out of nothing. Pressure cannot make you disciplined if discipline has never existed anywhere in your behavior. What it does, and this is the part that changes everything, is remove the competing behaviors that were drowning out the qualities you already have. You have done hard things. You have shown up when you didn't want to. You have made decisions under uncertainty and figured it out. Pressure doesn't create that capacity. It makes the softer choices temporarily unavailable. And suddenly, the capacity you always had becomes the only option on the table. That is not inspiration. That is mechanics. Let's talk about 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘. 𝗓𝗢𝗧 was 28, working in logistics coordination for a mid-sized import company in a city she'd moved to 6 years earlier with the intention of staying too. She was good at her job, thorough, reliable, the person her manager called first when something went wrong. She earned $51,000 a year and had saved just under $4,000 of it total. Not because she was irresponsible, because every raise got eaten by something reasonable. Every plan to start a side project got postponed for something equally reasonable. And the years were moving the way years do when you are busy and tired, and telling yourself that next quarter things will settle down. In October of the year she turned 28, the company announced a restructure. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘's department was being folded. She had 6 weeks before her role disappeared. She was not fired exactly. She was given a transition period, a small severance if she chose not to accept a lateral move that paid less and required relocating. She sat in her apartment that night and pulled up the freelance logistics consulting idea she had researched 14 months earlier and then filed away under someday. She had notes. She had identified potential clients. She had even drafted one cold email and never sent it. She sent it the next morning. Then 5 more. Not because she was suddenly brave. Because the comfortable option that had been allowing her to stay comfortable had just been removed from the table. By the end of those 6 weeks, 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 had 2 contracts. Neither was large. One paid her less per hour than her salary had. But she was no longer the person who would eventually start. She was the person who had started. That distinction, small as it sounds, changed every decision she made afterward. Within 18 months she had cleared more than she'd made at the company in a full year. The pressure did not create 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘's competence. It made her competence stop waiting. Now here is the part that closes the loop on January. You have started fresh so many times from a blank slate because a blank slate feels like freedom. And it is freedom, the freedom to choose again, to imagine, to plan. But blank slates also offer something more dangerous than freedom. They offer deferral. When the page is empty, you can always write tomorrow. When the pressure is low, the old identity stays comfortable in its old shape because nothing is requiring it to move. You have been standing at the edge of the pool, planning your perfect entry, telling yourself you'll go when the time is right. And the time keeps not being right because low pressure makes the waiting feel reasonable. This is why December matters more than January. When 30 days remain in a year, a real year, with a number attached, with the psychological weight of a chapter closing, the blank slate disappears. What remains is a countdown, and countdowns do not offer deferral. They offer a choice. Move now or watch the window close and carry the cost of having watched it close into everything that comes next. The compressed timeline is not a threat. It is a forge. What a forge reveals is worth understanding precisely. When 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 sent those emails, she did not feel ready. She felt pressured. The crucial thing, the thing she later said changed how she understood herself, was that she discovered the readiness she had been waiting for was not a feeling that would arrive before action. It was a feeling that arrived inside the action. After the first email went out, she knew something about herself she could not have known any other way. She knew she would send the next one, not because the fear was gone, because she had just demonstrated to herself that she was the kind of person who acts despite it. That is what compression does to identity. It gives you evidence about yourself that gradual, low-stakes effort cannot produce. You do not negotiate with your old self when the window is closing. You simply find out who shows up when negotiation is no longer on the menu. Down the line in this book, you are going to meet a claim about motivation, where it comes from when it arrives, and what it actually requires from you that overturns the common assumption. When that idea snaps into focus, it shifts how you build any kind of momentum in the final stretch of a year. But for now, sit with this. Pressure is not your enemy. Pressure is the first honest conversation you have had with the person you are actually capable of becoming. Every day of comfort you traded for that conversation is a day you spent knowing the iron, but never knowing what it could hold. The 30 days ahead are not a last chance. They are the most precise instrument of identity formation you have ever been handed. And the only reason they will work is the very thing that makes them terrifying. The window is closing. Who shows up when the comfortable option disappears? Chapter 4. The decade is decided in a month. Every month that passes without a decision is still a decision. You already know this somewhere in your body, even if you have never said it out loud. The money you are not building right now is not sitting still waiting for you. It is moving. It is compounding inside someone else's account, inside someone else's decade, while yours idles in a state of managed delay. And the mechanism causing this is not laziness. It is not a character flaw. It is a belief, one so ordinary it rarely gets examined. The belief that you still have time to ease into the version of your life that you actually want. That belief costs more than any bad investment you will ever make. Here is what this chapter is going to show you, not theoretically. With pattern evidence, with behavioral data written into the arc of real lives, there are specific windows, narrow, pressurized, often uncomfortable, where a single month of different behavior sets the financial trajectory for the full decade that follows. You are inside one of those windows right now. What does it mean to show up when the comfortable option disappears? It means the window is already open. The question is whether you walk through it. There is a concept that keeps appearing when you study how financial trajectories actually form, not how people believe they form, which is the slow, patient accumulation narrative, but how they actually form when you trace outcomes backward from the data. The concept is simple. It should feel slightly unsettling when you first hear it. Most 10-year financial outcomes are not built over 10 years. They are decided inside a single 30-day rupture. 1 month where behavior changed sharply and did not return to its previous shape. Researchers studying wealth accumulation in ordinary earners, not executives, not inheritance recipients, not outliers, but regular people in the 26 to 40 age range, have found that the majority of those who changed their financial position significantly could identify a specific period, often a single season, sometimes a single month, where the pivot happened, not a series of small, consistent improvements, a rupture, a line in the sand that held. This is called the decade hinge. Think about the last 10 years of your own life. Where were you financially 3 years ago, and where were you 7 years ago? Now ask the harder question. Was the difference between those 2 points built gradually, or was there one moment, one season, one decision that cast a long shadow forward? Most people, when they sit quietly with that question, can name the shadow. They can name the thing they did or did not do that became the current shape of their days. That is the mirror. That is the recognition. The decade hinge already happened once for you. The question this chapter is built around, and hold this question because the answer is coming, but not yet, is whether a hinge works both ways. Can you use the same mechanism that cost you before to pay you forward instead? Marcus was 29 and working in logistics coordination for a mid-sized freight company in Columbus, Ohio. Not a glamorous position, not a terrible one. He made enough to cover rent, cover his car, and cover the Saturday routine that kept weekends feeling like freedom even when they were not. He had a side project he had been circling for 2 years. A niche inventory software tool he had built on evenings and weekends to solve a problem he watched his company struggle with daily. It worked. His colleagues used it. His manager had mentioned once casually that someone should probably patent that. Marcus did nothing with it for 24 months. Then November came and his company announced restructuring. His position was not eliminated, but it was restructured into a form that required relocation. Marcus did not want to relocate. He had 30 days to decide. And in those 30 days, compressed, pressure-filled, deeply uncomfortable days, Marcus finished the software documentation, filed for a provisional patent, reached out to 3 freight companies through his professional network, and landed a licensing conversation that turned into a contract within 6 weeks of his resignation. 4 years later, Marcus was licensing that tool to 11 companies. Not millions of dollars, but enough to have bought a decade's worth of options that his logistics salary never could have. The software did not change in those 30 days. The market did not change. The opportunity was identical to what it had been for 2 years prior. What changed was the disappearance of the comfortable fallback. And once the fallback disappeared, Marcus discovered that he had been capable of decisive action the entire time. The capability was never the constraint. The comfort was. That is the first real-world pattern. The rupture created by external pressure. Now hold its opposite. Diana was 31, freelancing in brand design, doing well enough to consider taking on a small studio space and hiring one junior designer. The opportunity arrived in February of a year that was not particularly dramatic. A former client offered her a retainer arrangement large enough to justify the studio, large enough to justify the hire, and structured in a way that gave her 6 months of guaranteed runway. It was not a sure thing. Nothing is. But the numbers were reasonable and her instincts said yes. She asked for 2 weeks to think. 2 weeks became 4. 4 became 6. She sent a revised proposal. The client, by that point, had found someone who said yes in the first week. Diana went back to her apartment desk and her solo freelance life and told herself she was being prudent, that she would find another opportunity like it. She is still looking. Diana did not fail because she was careless. She failed the window because she trusted incremental thinking in a moment that demanded something different. Incremental thinking told her that more time meant more safety. What more time actually meant was a closed window and a decade that kept the same ceiling. Here is the thing that makes the decade hinge principle so difficult to act on. It does not look dramatic when you are inside it. Marcus did not feel heroic in those 30 days. He felt anxious. He felt the kind of tired that comes from doing effortful things while also being afraid. Diana did not feel like she was making a fatal error. She felt like she was being responsible. Both of them were responding to the same quiet voice that tells you comfort is safety. Comfort is not safety. Comfort is a cost you pay slowly enough not to notice. What this chapter is building toward is the recognition that you cannot separate the mechanism from the window. The decade hinge is not a lucky break or a dramatic event that arrives from outside your life. It is the point where the gap between who you have been and who the situation is requiring you to become gets forced into a single period of time. And that compression, that heat, is not the enemy of good decisions. It is the condition that makes real decisions possible. Most years you can avoid the decision. Most months you can defer the rupture. You can stay in the slow middle lane of managed delay and nothing will collapse immediately. That is the trap of incremental thinking. It never triggers a crisis visible enough to demand action. It just accumulates silently, the way a savings account earns nothing while inflation quietly erodes its real value. This is not the same as recklessness. Notice that. A decade hinge is not you abandoning sound judgment for dramatic gesture. Marcus did not quit his job and spend his savings. He used the pressure of a closing window to finally do the specific, concrete work he had been capable of for 2 years. The 30 days did not create his skill. They created his urgency. And urgency, when it is paired with preparation, is not dangerous. It is exactly what was missing. A little later, we will reach an idea about financial preparation. Once that lands, it reshapes how you act that overturns the common assumption. But for now, consider this. The decade that begins when 2026 ends will be shaped by something. It will not remain shapeless. Time moves whether you direct it or not. The financial reality you inhabit at 35, or 40, or 45 will have a direct line of causation running back to specific decisions made in specific windows. The question is not whether a hinge moment will set your decade. The question is whether it will be one you chose or one you stumbled past. You are holding the answer to the question this chapter opened with. Can the hinge work both ways? Can the same mechanism that calcifies a decade of avoidance be the mechanism that cracks it open? Yes, with one condition. The rupture has to be real. It has to cross a behavioral threshold you have not crossed before, not a slightly improved version of what you were already doing. A break, a visible line in your own history that you can point to and say, before this month and after this month were not the same person operating in the same way. That is what the 30-day forge means. Not a resolution, not a motivation cycle. A forge. Something enters one shape and exits another. The version of you that the next decade needs has a specific behavioral signature. You can probably feel its outline even now. The question is whether you will meet it in a month of pressure that you chose, rather than a month of pressure that chose you. Marcus and Diana both faced the hinge. One of them knew what it was. The knowing changed what was possible. Which version walks through what comes next? Chapter 5. Stop planning the life you're afraid to start. The plan is not the problem. The plan is the escape. That sounds like an attack on preparation. You might already be building your defense. It is not an attack. It is a diagnosis. There is a specific kind of planning, careful, color-coded, endlessly refined, that has nothing to do with getting somewhere. It has everything to do with avoiding the moment you have to become someone new. And if you have been planning the same financial future for longer than 6 months without moving, you already know which kind you have been doing. Here is the question that will quietly haunt this chapter. What if the plan is not a bridge to the life you want, but a wall between you and it? Hold that question. The answer will arrive. And when it does, it will require something from you that no spreadsheet ever has. Priya kept a binder, not a folder on her laptop, not a note in her phone, a physical 3-ring binder 2 inches thick with tabbed dividers in 4 colors, blue for income projections, green for expense tracking, yellow for the side business she had been researching for 14 months. Red for the vision board she had printed and laminated and hole-punched with the kind of care that most people reserve for things they actually intend to use. She was 31. She worked in supply chain logistics for a mid-size company in Raleigh, North Carolina. She made $58,000 a year and had been making roughly that for 4 years, with small raises that felt like compliments and spent like nothing. She had $4,000 saved. She wanted 30. She had wanted 30 for 3 years. The binder was beautiful. The binder was thorough. The binder had a section for contingency plans, which means she had a plan for when her plan did not work, which means she had not yet decided her plan was going to work. Priya was not lazy. Let that be clear. She was one of the hardest working people in her building. She stayed late. She answered emails on Sunday. She read business books on her lunch break and listened to financial podcasts during her commute. Every few weeks she would open the binder and add something new, a more refined projection, a market comparison, a note about timing. The binder grew. The $4,000 stayed at $4,000. One evening in October, her friend Marcus sat down across from her at dinner and asked to see it. She showed him. He flipped through it slowly. He asked good questions. He nodded in all the right places. And then he said something that Priya initially wanted to throw a bread roll at him for. He said, "This is incredible. You clearly have no intention of doing any of it." She did not speak to him for 11 days, and then she called him and said he was right. What Marcus saw that Priya could not see from inside the binder was the function the binder was serving. Every hour she put into planning was an hour that felt like progress. It registered in her body as movement. It triggered a small release of relief because she was doing something, wasn't she? She was not being idle. She was preparing. She was being responsible. She was getting ready to be ready. Getting ready to be ready. Sit with that phrase for a moment, because here is what that phrase describes. It describes a person who has made a silent agreement with themselves that action is always one preparation away, one more piece of research, one more number confirmed, one more condition met. And the conditions keep shifting, because the conditions are not the real requirement. The real requirement is something else entirely. The plan exists to make sure you never have to face it. Look back at the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Not the future you pictured, the reality you were actually in. What were you planning then? What was the thing you were just about to start, just about to launch, just about to commit to once everything was in place? And where is that thing now? Is it further along, or is it still waiting in a binder, physical or mental, while you gather more information about something you already know enough to begin? That is the mirror. Look at it long enough to be honest. The insight that most productivity culture misses is not that planning is bad. Planning up to a certain threshold is essential. You need a viable direction. You need basic math that holds. You need to know the first 3 moves. But there is a threshold beyond which more planning does not reduce risk. It only increases comfort. And comfort is the enemy of the version of you that the next decade requires. Here is how to spot when you have crossed that threshold. You have crossed it when you know enough to start but are still planning. You have crossed it when the new information you are gathering is not changing your direction, only delaying your departure. You have crossed it when the plan has sections, and the sections have subsections, and the subsections are well organized, and none of it has met the outside world for even 1 day. Every hour spent planning beyond that threshold is an hour spent avoiding the identity required to execute. Read that again. Not the plan itself, the identity required to execute. Because here is what Priya finally understood in that phone call with Marcus. The plan was never the issue. She knew how to start the side business. She had known for 8 months. The issue was that starting the side business would make her a person who starts things. And that person might fail. And that failure would be real and public and hers in a way that a binder full of projections never could be. The binder gave her the feeling of being the kind of person who has a plan. Starting the business would require her to actually be the kind of person who acts. Those two identities feel adjacent from the outside. From the inside, the distance between them is enormous. This is the villain's sharpest trick. It is worth naming directly. Incremental thinking does not feel like cowardice. It feels like wisdom. It feels like diligence. It tells you that you are being careful, being thorough, being responsible. It speaks in the language of prudence and patience and due diligence, and every word it uses is borrowed from genuine virtues, which is exactly what makes it so effective. You cannot argue against being careful. You cannot win a debate in favor of recklessness. So the slow accumulation of planning replaces the terrifying act of becoming, and it does so under cover of virtue. And December comes, and January comes, and you are older and the binder is thicker and the $4,000 is still $4,000. This is not a chapter about shame. Priya ended the phone call with Marcus and sat in her apartment for about 20 minutes doing nothing. Then she opened the binder and she did not add to it. For the first time in 14 months, she took something out. She removed the yellow section, the side business research, and put the rest of the binder in her closet. Then she took the yellow section to her kitchen table and read every page she had written, not as preparation, as evidence of everything she already knew. She found that she knew a great deal. She knew her target customer. She knew her pricing. She knew her first 3 clients were likely to come from 2 existing professional relationships and 1 cold email list she could build in an afternoon. She knew her costs were low and her margin was viable. She had written all of this down carefully across 14 months of responsible preparation. She sent the first email the next morning at 7:42 a.m. before she had time to open a single other application on her phone. The first client said yes within 4 days, not because she was finally ready, because she finally stopped requiring herself to be. That distinction is everything. Readiness, in the way most people use the word, is a feeling. And feelings of readiness are self-reinforcing fictions produced by the part of your brain that would prefer you never take a real risk. You do not get ready and then go. You go, and you discover that you were already ready enough. Or you discover exactly the gap between where you are and where you need to be, and that gap becomes real and specific and solvable in a way that no projected gap in a binder ever is. The 30 days ahead of you are not planning time. They are not research time. They are not the time to finally get organized before you organize. They are the forge. The thing that goes into a forge does not come out more informed. It comes out shaped differently. Pressure and heat do not produce better plans. They produce different metal. Here is what most people do not understand about pressure. The pressure of a real deadline, a calendar one, the kind where the year actually ends and another actually begins, does not create urgency by accident. It removes the one thing that endless planning depends on. It removes the illusion that there is still time to prepare. When time is genuinely limited, the plan either meets the world or it meets the closet. And you know now which of those 2 places your binder belongs. Further on, we will reach an idea about momentum that overturns the common assumption. When that becomes clear, it reshapes the order in which you take action for the rest of the decade. But for right now, here is what the next 30 days are asking of you, not your most refined version of the plan, your most honest answer to this. What is the one thing you have known long enough, researched long enough, and quietly avoided long enough that the next step requires nothing more from you except the willingness to become the person who actually does it? The binder is not the bridge. You are. Chapter 6. The one question that ends financial paralysis. Something is leaving you right now. It is not dramatic. It is not a crash. It is not a moment you will look back and name. It is the slow, daily departure of the version of you that could have been further along by now. Every decision you delay because you are not sure who you are yet, not sure if you are the kind of person who invests, who negotiates, who builds something real, that delay has a price. Not a visible one, not a price with a receipt, but it compounds. The money you did not put to work last year is not just that money. It is what that money would have produced. The habits you did not build in your late 20s do not simply wait for you in your 30s. They cost more to build later, they arrive later, and the decade you could have shaped is already halfway through. That is not a scare tactic. It is the quiet arithmetic of real life. The question is not whether this is happening to you. The question is whether you now have a tool that stops it. You are the author. A question came forward in the last chapter without closing it. You are the one already holding the pen, but knowing you are the author is different from knowing what to write next. Because the blank page does not ask you what you believe, it asks you what you do, right now, today. On the afternoon when motivation is low and the decision in front of you is real, and the old version of you is already composing a reason to wait. That is where most people get stuck, not in theory. In the Tuesday afternoon, in the moment when the idea is solid but the action feels premature, when the goal is clear but the identity needed to pursue it does not yet feel fully inhabited. You know what you want. You are not sure yet if you are the person who gets it. Here is the open loop this chapter will answer before it ends. When your identity is still forming, when the version you are becoming has not fully arrived, how do you make decisions as that person before you feel like them? Hold that question. Because the answer is not what you have been told. Return to the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Not just financially. Think about the decisions you made, the ones you hesitated on, the ones you said no to because you were not ready. Now think about whether the thing you were waiting to become actually arrived on its own, or whether it arrived because you made a decision that forced it into existence. Sit with that for a moment. Most people believe readiness precedes action, that you prepare, you feel confident, and then you move. But look at the actual sequence of your life. The moments you became someone new were rarely preceded by a feeling of readiness. They were preceded by a decision made in the absence of it. That is not inspirational rhetoric. That is the mechanism. There is a woman named Priya who managed a small team at a mid-sized logistics company. She was good at her job, dependable, detail-oriented, liked by her managers. She had been talking about building a side income for 2 years. She had done research. She had bookmarked resources. She had told her friend Danny about the plan at least 4 times across 4 different years. But every time the moment came to actually spend money on tools, to actually reach out to a potential first client, to actually register the name of the thing she was building, she would pause. And in that pause, a very specific thought would arrive. The thought was, I am not ready for this yet. I do not fully know what I am doing. What if I start and fail because I started too early? It sounds reasonable. It sounds like prudence. But that thought was costing her roughly 18 months of runway, not in dramatic, visible ways, in the slow accumulation of not yet which has no bottom. One evening in late November, Priya was on the edge of that pause again. She had a message drafted to a potential client. It was a good message, specific, professional, clear about what she was offering. Her finger was hovering. And the familiar thought arrived. I am not ready for this yet. This time, instead of accepting the thought or fighting it, she asked a different question. She asked, what would the version of me I am becoming do right now? Not who she was in that moment. Not who she had been for the last 2 years. The version she was in the process of becoming. The one who had 1 client, then 3, then a real business that gave her actual choices. What would that version of Priya do with this drafted message and this hovering finger? She sent the message, not because she felt ready, because the version she was becoming would not wait. The client responded the next morning. It was not some perfect outcome. It was a conversation. But it was a conversation the previous version of Priya had been delaying for 22 months, and in the sending, something inside her reorganized. Not dramatically, but irreversibly. Notice what happened there. Priya did not wait until she felt like the version she was becoming. She used the question as a real-time decision tool. She asked it in the moment, and it gave her access to a future identity before that identity had fully solidified. That is not pretending. That is not fake confidence. That is the actual mechanism by which identities get built. Here is the principle. Identities are not discovered. They are constructed through decisions. And the decisions that construct them almost always precede the feeling of being that person. You do not feel like a person who sends bold messages and then becomes someone who sends them. You send one, and then another. The identity forms in the doing, not in the preparation for the doing. This is what incremental thinking will never tell you. Incremental thinking, the belief that slow, cautious, step-by-step mediocrity is the responsible path, will have you preparing forever. It will have you saying, when I have more experience, more savings, more confidence, more clarity, then I will act like the person I am trying to become. But more experience only comes from acting. More confidence only comes from surviving decisions. Clarity only sharpens when you have real data. And real data only arrives when you have moved. The version you are becoming does not live in the future waiting for you to catch up. It lives in every decision you make that aligns with what that person would do. You are either building that version right now, or you are eroding the possibility of it, one pause at a time. Ask the question, what would the version I am becoming do right now? Ask it when you are about to spend money on something that keeps you exactly where you are. Ask it when someone offers you a small professional opportunity that feels slightly above your current comfort. Ask it when a conversation could go deeper and more honest, and you feel the pull to keep its surface. Ask it when the decision is uncomfortable not because it is wrong but because it is new. This is not a trick. It is a reorientation device. It moves the decision-making seat from the person you have been to the person the next 30 days are building. And in that shift, the decision changes. Now close the loop. Earlier, this chapter asked how you make decisions as the person you are becoming before you fully feel like them. The answer is this. You use a question instead of a feeling as your decision signal. Feelings come after the fact. You feel like a swimmer after you have been in the water. You feel like someone who invests after you have watched an investment grow. You feel like someone who builds things after something you built is real. The question bypasses the waiting. It gives you access to the behavior that creates the feeling, before the feeling arrives to grant you permission. That is a precise and important distinction. Because the version of you that is most dangerous to your next decade is not the version that makes big mistakes. It is the version that quietly, reasonably, sensibly waits. The version that accumulates good reasons to delay. That version feels responsible. It feels like prudence. But it is costing you the decade. The 30 days ahead are not casual time. The year is ending. And every December has 2 kinds of people inside it. The ones for whom the ending of the year is something that happens to them, and the ones for whom the ending of the year is a deliberate final forge, a period in which they make decisions as the person they intend to be for the next 10 years. The difference between those two groups is rarely talent. It is rarely resources. It is almost always whether they have access to a question that can replace the feeling of readiness in a real-time moment. You have that question now. Soon, we will reach an idea about momentum that overturns the common assumption. After that clicks, it reshapes how you choose to begin things. But right now, the one thing to carry forward is this. Acting from your future identity before you feel ready is not pretending. It is how the identity gets built. Chapter 7. Why Small Wins in December Beat Big Wins in March. The timing of a win matters more than the win itself. That sounds like something a calendar company would print above a motivational photograph, and you are right to be suspicious of it. But hold that suspicion for a moment. What is coming is not inspiration. It is a mechanical explanation of why your brain encodes experience differently depending on when that experience occurs. Once you understand the mechanism, you will never look at a small December victory the same way again. This chapter keeps circling one question from start to finish. Why does Priya, a woman you are about to meet, feel more changed by one quiet win in the last week of December than by 4 larger wins she accumulated the previous spring? The answer does not live in the wins themselves. It lives in the pressure window surrounding them. That pressure window, the one you are standing inside right now, is something you can use deliberately if you understand exactly what it does to the way identity forms. The last chapter left you with an idea. Acting from your future identity before you feel ready is not pretending. It is how the identity gets built. This chapter goes one level deeper. It explains why doing that inside this specific 30 days prints differently than doing it any other time of year. Priya taught secondary school in Coventry. She was 31, organized, dependable, and quietly frustrated. For 3 consecutive years, she had made the same financial resolution in January, executed it with genuine effort through February and most of March, and then watched it dissolve somewhere around the time the weather changed and the urgency faded. The resolutions were real. The effort was real. The wins she earned in those spring months, paying off 1 credit card, building a small emergency fund, finally opening the investment account she had talked about for 2 years, those were real too. But none of them stuck to her sense of self. She would make the progress, acknowledge it, and then quietly return to the same financial behavior she had practiced for years. The wins sat in her bank statement like trophies on a shelf, visible, impressive even, but inert. Then December came. Not a new year, not a fresh start, not a moment anyone told her was significant. Just December with its noise and pressure and the particular feeling that time is closing in. She decided, not dramatically, just practically, to do one concrete thing before the year ended. She automated a transfer of £60 a week into a separate account and did not touch it. 6 weeks. That was the whole plan. Ask yourself something right now. Think about a financial habit you started in a moment of calm, a January, a quiet Tuesday, a week when nothing was pressing. How long did it last before it started feeling optional? Now think about something you finished under pressure. A deadline that was real, a window that was actually closing. How did completing that feel different in your body? That difference has a name. Psychologists who study memory and self-perception call it temporal identity anchoring. When you accomplish something inside a time window your brain has already tagged as meaningful and closing, the accomplishment does not just get stored as a fact. It gets stored as evidence about who you are. The pressure of the window acts as a kind of encoding agent. It increases the emotional temperature of the experience. And emotional temperature is exactly what determines how deeply a memory integrates into your sense of self. A win at ordinary temperature sits in episodic memory. You remember that it happened. A win at high temperature moves into identity. You become someone for whom that kind of win is normal. This is why 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 60 pounds a week mattered more to her internal wiring than the credit card she paid off in March. The credit card payoff was larger by every objective measure, but March carried no pressure. March felt like plenty of time. March, the brain files under the category of things that happened to me. December carries a different signal entirely. The year is ending. The version of yourself who enters next year is being decided right now. The brain knows this not symbolically, not metaphorically, but neurologically. Time pressure increases amygdala engagement, which increases the emotional salience of experience, which increases the depth of encoding. The win brands itself. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 did not feel like she had made a good financial decision. She felt like she had become a person who does that. Those are not the same thing, and the distance between them is the entire distance between one productive December and a decade of compound change. Later on, we will reach an idea about motivation, specifically, why people who are highly motivated at the start of a project consistently underperform people who feel only moderate motivation that overturns the common assumption. Once you see why, the contradiction resolves in a way that will change how you start things, not just how you finish them. But for now, stay here. Stay in the mechanism. There is a reason forge is the right word for these 30 days. A forge does not gently shape metal. It uses intense heat to make the metal temporarily malleable, and then the pressure of the mold determines what it becomes when it cools. Without the heat, pressure does nothing. Without the mold, heat produces only damage. Both have to be present at the same time, and the window for both being present simultaneously is always short. You are inside that window right now. The incremental thinking that has governed most financial advice you have ever received, save a little, spend a little less, be consistent, be patient, is not wrong in principle. It is wrong in sequence. It tells you to skip the forge entirely and go straight to the slow cooling. But if you have never been through the forge, you are trying to harden a shape you have not yet formed. The consistency, then, is just consistently being the previous version of yourself, wearing slightly better habits like a costume. The forge comes first. December is not a metaphorical forge. The pressure is literal. The year is objectively ending. The psychological stakes of how you show up in this window are real, because the identity you demonstrate to yourself right now is the one your brain will use as its operating template going into the decade ahead. This is the decade hinge, not in the abstract sense that every year contains possibility, in the concrete sense that the years between 20 and 35 are when financial identity calcifies. The habits, the self-concept, the baseline assumptions about what you are capable of, those are still moldable right now. But the window for easy molding narrows every year. The heat is available to you right now in a way it will not be in 5 years. Use it deliberately. This brings back 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 because her story has a second half. The following March, she made a larger financial move. She renegotiated her phone contract, canceled 3 subscriptions she had been meaning to cancel for months, and redirected almost £200 into her savings account in a single afternoon, objectively more impactful than the automated £60 transfer. By every measurable standard, a bigger win. It did not feel like the December wind. It did not stick the same way. She told her sister about it. Her sister said that was smart, and by the following week Priya had largely forgotten the emotional texture of the afternoon. The December wind she still carries, not as a memory exactly, as a fact about herself. She is someone who moves money automatically toward a goal without touching it. That self-concept made every subsequent financial decision slightly easier. She was no longer deciding based on who she had been. She was deciding based on who she had become in 6 weeks of December pressure. This is the version you become, not the version you plan to become, not the version you tell people you are working toward. The version that emerges from actual behavior inside actual pressure, encoded at high emotional temperature, cooling into a new baseline. Here is the open loop from the beginning of this chapter, and it is ready to close now. The question was why Priya's small December win felt more significant than her previous March wins. The answer is not discipline, willpower, or the size of the action. The answer is that the brain weighs context when it decides how to categorize an experience. Context of finality, of a closing window, of a year ending and a new one beginning. That context signals that what you do right now is definitional. Your brain responds to definitional moments by encoding them at a depth it reserves for identity, not just behavior. A behavior is something you do. An identity is something you are. The forge converts one into the other, but only under sufficient heat. The heat is time pressure. The pressure is December. The mold is whatever small concrete action you take inside it. Small wins in December do not just add to your record. They edit your self-concept. And your self-concept is the lens through which every financial decision in 2027 and beyond will be made. March wins add to the ledger. December wins rewrite the author. What specifically will you do in the next 30 days that your nervous system will recognize as evidence that you are already someone different? Not evidence for anyone else, evidence for yourself. Because that is the only evidence that actually changes anything. How you answer that question leads directly into what Chapter 9 is going to ask you to carry. Chapter 8. The 30-day forge has already started. Every hour you spend without a structure is costing you something you cannot name yet. That is the part that makes it so easy to ignore. If you could see the number, the exact dollar figure of the version of your life that is slipping past while you wait for clarity or confidence or the right moment, you would not wait one more day. But the loss does not arrive as a bill. It arrives as drift. Quiet, daily, compounding drift. The next version of you, the one who earns differently, thinks differently, and moves through the world with a kind of settled certainty. That version is not waiting on a miracle. That version is waiting on a structure. And the gap between you and that version is not measured in years anymore. It is measured in 30 days, 30 specific days that are already moving whether you have claimed them or not. The question this chapter answers is the one you may not have known to ask. What does it actually mean to use 30 days as a forge? And what happens inside you when you do? Before we go further, remember something. Earlier in these pages, 30 days was introduced as pressure, as a deadline, as the thing bearing down on you from the end of the calendar like a wall you were running toward. That framing was intentional. You needed to feel the weight of it before you could choose it. But here, in Chapter 8, the container changes. The pressure does not disappear. It becomes yours. You are no longer running toward the wall. You are inside the forge, and the heat is the point. There is a difference between a schedule and a forge. A schedule tells you what to do. A forge tells you who to become while you are doing it. This distinction sounds small. It is not small at all. Picture the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Not the version of you sitting here right now, having moved through 7 chapters of a book about your own financial future. 3 years ago. Whatever you were doing, whatever you were believing about what was possible for you, whatever ceiling you were living under without even questioning it, that version of you could not have predicted the version of you listening to this right now. The changes that happened between then and now were not always dramatic. Some were quiet. Some were one conversation, one decision, one shift in how you spent a particular Tuesday. But they accumulated into someone different. The next 3 years will do the same thing. The only question is whether you let those years accumulate you by accident, or whether you build the next version deliberately, starting now, in the 30 days that remain. Here is what that deliberate building looks like. It moves through 3 phases, and each phase has a name. The first phase is called rupture. Rupture does not mean destruction. It means creating a clean break from the story you have been telling about what you are capable of. You do not need to blow up your life to create a rupture. You need to do one thing that the previous version of you would not have done. Not a comfortable thing. Not a slightly outside your comfort zone thing that still feels like you. Something that makes you feel, for a moment, like you are wearing someone else's clothes. The discomfort is the point. The discomfort is the signal that the identity is actually shifting, not just the behavior. Rupture occupies roughly the first 10 days of your 30. During these 10 days, the single most important thing you can do is interrupt the pattern of decisions that has been quietly running your financial life on autopilot. That means looking directly at what you have been avoiding, the account you have not opened, the call you have not made, the number you have been keeping vague in your mind because vague feels safer than specific and wrong. Rupture brings you into contact with the specific. The specific is uncomfortable, and it is also the only thing that is real. Priya knew this. She had been carrying a number in her head for months, a rough, rounded down, softened estimate of what she owed and what she earned and the gap between them. The number was not accurate. She kept it inaccurate on purpose, without consciously deciding to. Because the accurate number felt like a verdict. On a Wednesday in early November, she sat down and made the number exact, not rounded, not approximated, exact. And then she did something more important than looking at it. She said the number out loud, alone in her apartment to no one. Because saying it out loud made it a fact and not a fear. She had been living in a story about the number. The moment she spoke it, the story lost some of its power. The fact became something she could work with. That is rupture, not the dramatic overhaul. The one precise act of contact with what is actually true. The second phase is rehearsal. Rehearsal runs from roughly day 11 through day 22. And here is what most people misunderstand about this phase. It is not about practicing habits. It is about practicing a self. There is a version of you who handles money with a particular kind of attention, who makes decisions from a specific place, not from anxiety, not from avoidance, but from a clear-eyed awareness of where you are and where you are heading. Rehearsal is the phase where you practice being that person before you fully believe you are that person. This is not pretending. This is how identity actually forms. The research on this is consistent, and it is old. Behavior precedes belief in most meaningful personal change. You do not first become the kind of person who takes money seriously and then start taking money seriously. You start taking money seriously, repeatedly, in small daily acts, and the identity forms around those acts like a callus forming around a grip. This is why the specific daily actions inside rehearsal matter so much. Not because any single one of them will make you rich. Because each one adds one thin layer of evidence to the case you are building inside yourself about who you are. In rehearsal, Priya spent 11 days doing one thing each morning that the previous version of her would have put off. Not a different thing each day, the same category of thing. She tracked. She reviewed. She made one deliberate decision about money before 11 o'clock in the morning, every single day. Some days the decision was small. Some days it cost her something she would rather have kept. What accumulated across those 11 days was not just data. It was proof. Proof she was not imagining. Proof that lived in her body as much as in her bank account. You have to ask yourself honestly, what is the one daily act, the one before-noon decision that would serve as rehearsal for the version of you that the next chapter of your life requires? Do not answer quickly. Let the question sit for a moment. The third phase is root. Root begins around day 23 and carries you through the final days of the 30. And root is where the forge does its deepest work. By day 23, two things have happened. You have made contact with what is true. That is the gift of rupture. You have built evidence that you can act from a new place. That is the gift of rehearsal. Now, in root, the question is whether you will claim the new identity or treat it as a temporary experiment that ends when the calendar flips. Most people get to this phase without knowing it. They have done the work. They have changed more than they realize. And then they wait for some external confirmation, a number in an account, a response from someone else, some proof that the world has registered the change before they allow themselves to say, I am actually different now. The confirmation never arrives fast enough to feel satisfying. So they slide back into the old story. Root means you stop waiting for external confirmation. You plant the new self into the ground before the world has caught up to you. This is the part that takes the most courage. It requires you to commit to a version of yourself that has not yet been fully validated by your results. Here is the open loop that has been moving through this chapter since the beginning. Now you are ready for it to close. The question was this: what is the real difference between someone who does 30 days of effort and someone who uses 30 days as a forge? The answer is not discipline. It is not willpower. It is not even strategy, though strategy matters. The difference is that one person finishes the 30 days and returns to their prior identity with some new information. The other person finishes the 30 days and cannot return, because the identity they would return to no longer fits. Root is how you make the return impossible, not by burning the bridge, by building something in the new place that is worth more than what you left. Priya did not mark the end of her 30 days with a celebration or a metric. She marked it with a decision, a real one with a real cost that 6 weeks earlier she would have talked herself out of. She made the decision quietly on a Thursday without telling anyone. Afterward, she sat with what it felt like to have made it. What she felt was not excitement. It was something closer to recognition. She recognized herself in the decision. She recognized that the person who had made it was not who she had been in October. That recognition is the forge completing its work. Structure without identity is a schedule. Structure inside an identity shift is a forge. You have heard this now. And the distance between hearing it and living it is exactly the 3 phases you just moved through. Rupture, rehearsal, root. 10 days of contact with what is true. 11 days of rehearsing who you are becoming. 9 days of planting yourself in the new ground before the confirmation arrives. The 30 days are not waiting for you to be ready. They are already moving. As this book keeps moving, we will reach an idea about how financial change actually becomes permanent that overturns the common assumption. Once you grasp that turn, it reshapes how you act on everything the forge has built. But before you get there, Chapter 9 is going to ask you something harder than anything this chapter required. It is going to ask you what you are willing to carry forward and what you are finally willing to put down. Chapter 9. The person who finishes 2026 is not you yet. Every generation that has ever lived has had a moment where a choice was made, not in public, not in ceremony, but in private, in the quiet space between who someone was and who they were about to become. This pattern repeats without exception, across every culture that kept records and every culture that did not. Historians and storytellers alike describe the same quiet rupture. The moment a person stopped carrying the old version of themselves and picked up something new instead. The people who made that choice did not always have more resources. They did not always have more time. What they had was a particular kind of clarity about the precise moment they were standing in. You are standing in that moment right now, not metaphorically, not eventually. The final 30 days of 2026 are your version of that recurring human crossroads. What you decide to do in this chapter, inside your own mind, before you finish listening, will determine which side of that threshold you walk out on. Chapter 8 asked what you could endure. This chapter asks something different. It asks who you are planning to be when the enduring is over. Here is the open question. Hold it, because this chapter will not answer it until you have earned the answer. The question is this: if the person you are becoming already exists somewhere in you, why does it feel like a stranger? Sit with that. You will know the answer before these words are finished. Revisit the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly, not in terms of what you had, in terms of how you thought. The decisions you made then feel smaller now, maybe even embarrassing, because you can see things now that you genuinely could not see then. That is not a failure of your past self. That is evidence of something important. It means the version of you who existed 3 years ago was not the finished version. And the version of you who exists right now, listening to this, somewhere inside 2026, is also not the finished version. The person who finishes this year, who closes out this 30-day forge with something done and something decided, that person is not you yet. But here is what the previous 8 chapters have been quietly building toward. That person is closer to the surface than you think. The villain this whole book has been naming incremental thinking, the slow creep of small, consistent mediocrity. It does not announce itself loudly. It whispers. It says, "Do this gradually, do not rush, be realistic, you have time." And every year that logic sounds reasonable. Until you look up and realize another year passed. The gap between who you are and who you plan to become did not close. It widened. 30 days will not solve everything, but 30 days, used with the kind of intention this book describes, can do something more important than solving problems. It can prove something to you about yourself that no amount of future planning can prove in advance. Proof only exists after action. Here is where the frame flips. Earlier in this book, 30 days was pressure, a countdown, a deadline with weight on it. The year ending felt like something chasing you. That framing was necessary. Pressure creates shape. But there is a second way to see the same 30 days. This second view does not cancel the pressure. It transforms what the pressure is for. The 30 days are not the threat. The 30 days are the forge. Pressure applied to formless metal does not destroy the metal. It reveals what the metal can become. You are not being chased by the end of 2026. You are being shaped by it. And the difference between those two experiences, being chased and being shaped, is entirely a function of how you have chosen to hold the time. Now, Priya, you met her in the opening of this book. She was sitting at a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, laptop open, a number on the screen that made her stomach drop. The number was not catastrophic. That was almost worse. It was just enough to confirm what she had been quietly afraid of for 2 years, that she was behind, that the gap was real, and that she had run out of ways to pretend otherwise. She closed the laptop without doing anything. She went to bed, and she told herself she would figure it out in the new year. That version of Priya chose the gradual option, the comfortable delay. Now watch what happens when you replay that same Tuesday evening with a different version of her. Not a different life. The same Tuesday, the same kitchen, the same number on the screen. This Priya looks at the number longer. She does not close the laptop. She opens a blank document and writes one sentence. I am not going to meet next year the same way I am meeting this one. She does not have a plan yet. She does not have a system. She has something more fundamental than either of those things. She has made a declaration about her own identity that her behavior will now have to catch up with. She goes to bed that night feeling something unfamiliar. Not excitement exactly, not certainty. Something more like solidity, like a floor under her feet she did not have before. That is not a different outcome. That is a different person making the same decision. The distinction matters enormously. Most people believe the identity comes after the results. Do the work, get the money, become the person. That is the sequence they are waiting for. And waiting for that sequence is exactly why they stay stuck. The sequence runs the other way. You do not find your new identity at the end of 30 days. You find it by behaving as if it already exists. This is the revelation the book has been building toward since the first chapter. The forge is not something that happens to you over 30 days. The forge is something you consent to. And the consent is not made once at the beginning. It is made every day, in small decisions. In what you pick up and what you put down. In whether you act like someone who is already on the other side of this, or someone who is still waiting for permission to begin. The version of you who finishes 2026 strong is not waiting at the end of the 30 days like a reward. That version exists right now, inside the decisions you make today. So this is the point where the chapter answers its opening question in plain terms. If the person you are becoming already exists somewhere in you, why does it feel like a stranger? It feels like a stranger because you have been treating it like a future state rather than a present choice. Strangers become familiar through contact, through repetition, through deciding, again and again, that the unfamiliar behavior is one you are claiming as your own. The person who finishes 2026 is not you yet, but every hour you spend from this moment forward either closes that gap or widens it. What are you carrying forward? Only what serves the version of yourself you just described, not described to anyone else. Described in the space between your own ears, in the moment you read that sentence about Priya and felt something move in your chest. That feeling is not nostalgia. It is recognition. You recognize something in her second Tuesday that you already know belongs to you. What are you putting down? The story that the timing is not right. The story that you need more resources before you can begin to act like the person who has them. The story that 30 days is too small a window to matter. 30 days is not a small window. 30 days is a decade's hinge. The decade ahead will be shaped by the person who shows up on the first day of 2027. And that person is assembled quietly, irreversibly, in the 30 days that precede it. You are not being asked to be perfect. You are not being asked to eliminate fear or doubt or the weight of every mistake that got you here. You are being asked to act for the next 30 days, like someone who has already decided which side of the threshold they are walking out on. Chapter 10 is not about strategy. What would you do differently, right now, if you stopped waiting to become that person and simply decided you already are? Chapter 10, 2027 begins the moment you decide. You have made it to the last page. That alone tells you something. Most people who picked up this book put it down somewhere around chapter 3. They filed it next to the other books they meant to finish and returned to the version of their life they already knew. You kept reading. The honest question worth sitting with right now is this: did you read all of this the way you read a novel, curious, engaged, safely distant from the ideas? Or did something in these pages actually break the surface? There is a difference between a person who finished a book and a person who let a book finish something in them. You know which one you are. You felt it somewhere in chapter 4 or 5 when a specific sentence landed a little too accurately and you paused for just a second longer than usual. That pause was not coincidental. That pause was recognition. The question this chapter is going to answer is simple. What do you actually do with that recognition? Not tomorrow, not on January 1st, right now. Here is something that did not come up earlier in this book, and it needs to come up now. Every year, millions of people reach December with genuine intention. They name the things they want. They describe the person they are becoming. They mean every word of it. And then January arrives and the intentions do not move. Not because the intentions were false, not because the people were lazy or broken, but because they made a critical error that no one named clearly enough for them to avoid. They treated the new year as the starting line. They believed the calendar had power over the decision. They thought January 1st would feel different, would carry some additional force that Tuesday in late December simply could not provide. It never does. January 1st feels exactly like December 31st. Same apartment, same bank balance, same voice in your head running the same loop about what is realistic and what is not. The calendar does not hinge anything. You hinge it. The decade does not begin because a number changes. The decade begins because you change. And you change the moment you decide to stop negotiating with the older version of yourself who had very good reasons for staying small. Call up the shape of your life before these last 3 years unfolded and look at it plainly. Specifically, what were you worried about then? What did you tell yourself you needed to figure out before you could make a real move? 3 years passed. Some of that worry dissolved on its own. Some of it is still there, wearing different clothes. And the version of you that existed 3 years ago, if given the chance to talk to you today, would have called your current situation either better than expected or frustratingly similar to what they feared. Here is the sharpest version of that observation. The things that changed in the last 3 years mostly changed because something happened, not because you decided. The job shift, the relationship that ended, the bill that got too high to ignore external pressure moved you more than internal decision did. This chapter is about reversing that ratio, starting now. Not because now is symbolic, but because now is what exists. Nadia was 31 when she decided to stop thinking of herself as someone who was building towards something. She started behaving like someone who had already chosen what she was building. She was not rich. She had $412 in savings and a job that paid well enough to keep her comfortable, and too well to make leaving feel urgent. The comfort was the trap. She recognized it on a Thursday evening, sitting in her car in a parking garage, finishing a podcast she had heard 3 times before because something in it kept nagging at her. She did not quit her job that night. She did not make a dramatic declaration. What she did was smaller and more permanent. She opened her phone and sent 3 emails she had been drafting in her head for 6 months. One to a potential client, one to a mentor she had been too intimidated to contact. One to herself, written out like a contract. Not a vision board, a contract. Specific, present tense, unambiguous about what she was no longer willing to accept from herself. She did not wait for the right month. She did not wait for the feeling of readiness. She acted from the identity she was claiming, not from the one she was leaving behind. Nadia's financial life did not change overnight, but her decade changed on a Thursday in a parking garage because she stopped waiting for permission from a calendar. The permission was always yours to give. Here is the open loop that has been running underneath everything in this book. It deserves a direct answer before you close it. From the first chapter, there was a question embedded in the premise. Why 30 days? Why is this specific window, the final 30 days of 2026, the forge rather than any other 30 days? The answer is not that December has magic. The answer is that pressure does. A defined container creates a different quality of decision than an open horizon does. When you tell yourself you will do something this year, the year absorbs the intention and dilutes it. When you tell yourself you will do it in 30 days, the boundary makes the decision real. The forge works because you chose to enter it. The 30 days of this book were never about the calendar. They were about you agreeing to hold yourself inside a crucible long enough for the heat to do what heat does. What you become inside that container does not evaporate on January 1st. It carries forward. The habits that take root in a crucible are not the same as habits picked up casually during a comfortable month. They were built under pressure. They were chosen when staying comfortable was still available as an option. That is what makes them durable. That is what makes the person who built them different from the person they were before the 30 days began. You are that person now, not because of what you read, because of what you let land, because of the moment somewhere in this book when you stopped analyzing the ideas and started feeling them as instructions meant specifically for you. That moment was the hinge, not January, not the new year. That moment when you felt the recognition and did not look away. Which brings you to the one thing this chapter is going to ask of you before you close this book. Not a plan, not a goal list. One sentence. Write it down on anything, your phone, a receipt, the back of something. One present tense sentence that names who you are now. Not who you are working toward, not who you hope to become, who you are. The version of you that finished this book and decided to act like the decade has already begun, because it has. Write it in the language of arrival, not aspiration. Not I am becoming someone who builds real wealth. Write it as I am the person who makes decisions about money from a place of clarity, not fear. Make it specific to what you heard in these pages that felt most like instruction. Write it once. Say it once out loud. And then act from it today, in whatever the next available hour allows. That sentence is not a ritual. It is not positive thinking. It is the line you draw between the self that negotiated and the self that decided. The decade does not start when the year turns. It started the moment you stopped waiting to become the person and simply decided you already are.